At True Echo, we bring you real stories that feel almost too incredible to be true. Tales of courage, justice, redemption, and the unstoppable human spirit. Today's story is one you'll never forget. A corrupt police force thought they could break an elderly black veteran. They had no idea the call he made was to the deadliest Delta Force commander in history, his own son. And when the ghost came home, everything changed. Stay with us, because by the end you'll see why no one should ever underestimate the quiet strength of a soldier, or his family. The dusty afternoon sun slanted low across Millbrook as Harold Carter wiped grease from his hands and tightened the last bolt on a sputtering Toyota Camry. He'd been fixing cars for 43 years, ever since coming home from Vietnam with 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and memories he'd never speak of. His auto repair shop, once an abandoned shell, had grown into a trusted pillar of the community. The walls were lined with old photographs. Him in uniform, his late wife Margaret holding their newborn son, and framed awards from local veterans organizations. Harold loved this work. It was honest, steady, a kind of therapy in a world that often felt like it had lost its mind. But today the air was heavier. A feeling he hadn't felt since the jungles of Da Nang crawled over his spine. The bell over the shop door chimed. Harold didn't look up immediately, focused on loosening a stubborn bolt. "Be right with you," he called out, his voice deep and steady. "Take your time, old man," sneered a voice he recognized instantly. Officer James Blake, Millbrook's enforcer, the smiling face of a system built on fear and corruption. Harold turned slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, to see 3 uniformed officers standing inside. Blake at the center, smirking, with officers Thompson and Walker flanking him like hyenas ready to feast. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Harold asked, keeping his voice polite, though the knot in his gut tightened. Blake sauntered forward, dragging a finger along the Camry's dusty hood. "Nice operation you got here, Carter. 40 years, right? Must be doing pretty well." "I do honest work for honest pay," Harold replied firmly. Blake chuckled, a cold sound. "Honest work? That's rare these days. See, times are changing. Costs are going up. Regulations are tighter. Harder for a small business to survive unless," he paused, letting the silence hang, "they have a little protection." Harold knew this game. He'd heard whispers, minority-owned businesses squeezed until they either paid up or folded. It wasn't protection. It was extortion with a badge. "I manage just fine," Harold said. Thompson, the stockier officer, stepped forward. "We're just here to make sure local businesses have the support they need." "Support?" Harold repeated, his mouth twisting into a grim smile. "No thanks. I fought real enemies before. I know what a bully looks like." The garage seemed to grow colder. Blake's smile vanished, replaced with something meaner. "Careful, old man. Disturbing a police officer can be considered disturbing the peace." Harold didn't flinch. "I know my rights. I earned them. You're not taking anything from me." Blake leaned close, his hand resting near his holstered gun. $500 a month. Or maybe your shop catches fire. Accidents happen." "No," Harold said, steady as bedrock. Blake's face darkened. "Maybe you should sleep on it." "I've survived worse than you," Harold said, voice low. "Get out of my shop." For a long, dangerous moment, Blake hovered there. Finally, he straightened, flicked invisible dust from his uniform, and signaled to the others. "You're making a mistake," Blake said as he turned to leave. "A big one. Fires start easy in places like this." Harold watched them go, knowing full well this wasn't the end. And as he locked up that night, he wondered how far they would push him. How far he would have to push back. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when Harold finished double-checking every lock and security measure around his shop. His gut twisted with a familiar sense of foreboding, the same instinct that had saved him more than once in Vietnam. As he approached his old Ford truck parked across the street, he noticed the silhouettes. 3 figures lingering in the shadows of a nearby alley, watching. Harold didn't flinch. He got in his truck and drove home as if nothing was wrong. But his mind was working overtime. He needed security cameras, more locks, maybe even some backup from his old vet buddies. They wouldn't go down without a fight. The next morning, Harold pulled up to his shop and knew something was wrong before he even got out of his truck. Glass glittered across the pavement, cruel and jagged in the morning sun. The windows were smashed, the bay doors defaced with crude graffiti. Inside, his tools, some of which he'd owned since the 70s, were smashed and scattered. Oil had been poured over customer vehicles. And on the workbench, a dead rat with a note pinned to it. "Next time it's you." Harold stood there, breathing heavily, not out of fear, but fury. He had seen men die in jungles halfway across the world for ideals like freedom and justice. And now, in the country he fought for, he was being terrorized by the very people sworn to protect it. Still, he knew better than to retaliate the wrong way. He called the insurance company, documented everything and prepared to report it properly. But as he was sweeping up the broken glass, a health inspector arrived, smirking and carrying a clipboard. "Serious violations here," the man said, barely concealing his glee. "Unsafe conditions, environmental hazards. Gonna have to shut you down." It was all too convenient. Harold recognized the playbook. Destroy a business, then bury it in fines and bureaucracy. But he refused to give them the satisfaction. He filed a police report anyway, knowing it would go nowhere. When he arrived at the Millbrook Police Department, Blake was already waiting in the lobby, lounging like a cat that had caught a mouse. Well, Blake drawled. "If it isn't Mr. Tough Guy." "I'm here to file a report," Harold said firmly. Blake snorted. "Disturbing the peace again, huh? Maybe you need to spend a night in lockup to think things over." Before Harold could react, Blake twisted his arm behind his back and slapped on the cuffs. The older man didn't resist. He knew better. "You're under arrest," Blake announced loudly, for disturbing the peace and resisting arrest. The station's other officers barely looked up. Harold was fingerprinted, photographed, and thrown into a holding cell. As he sat alone behind the cold metal bars, Harold thought of all the soldiers he had served with, men who had died for ideals that were now being trampled underfoot by petty tyrants like Blake. He was allowed one phone call. And Harold knew exactly who to call. The line crackled once, twice, then connected. "Dad?" came a deep, familiar voice. "Son," Harold said quietly, "I need your help. Remember what you said about bullies in uniform?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then Damon Carter's voice changed, became cold, sharp, lethal. "Tell me everything," Damon said. Thousands of miles away, in a classified operations room hidden beneath layers of secure fencing and desert heat, Colonel Damon Carter stood absolutely still as he listened to his father's story. Around him, elite Delta Force operators moved quietly, monitoring the progress of an unrelated mission. But in that moment, the world outside his father's voice ceased to matter. When Harold finished explaining everything, the threats, the vandalism, the arrest, there was a terrible, focused silence. Damon's second-in-command, Captain Sarah Williams, approached carefully. She could tell by the set of her commander's jaw that something had shifted. "Ghost," she said, using his call sign, "mission extraction window is in 20 minutes. "Not anymore," Damon replied, his voice low and dangerous. "You have command, Captain. I'm wheels up in 30. Williams blinked in shock. "Sir, is this sanctioned?" "No," Damon said bluntly. "This is personal." Without waiting for a response, he moved like a force of nature, gathering only what he needed. His encrypted laptop, a sidearm, and a sleek black bag packed with minimal gear. He wasn't going into battle with an army. He didn't need one. By the time he boarded the military transport arranged through a favor owed, Lieutenant Foster, their communications specialist, handed him a slim dossier. "We pulled everything, sir. Millbrook PD is dirty top to bottom. Ties to organized crime, money laundering, intimidation schemes. It's deep. Blake's just the surface." "And?" Damon prompted. Foster hesitated. "The mayor's in it too. Looks like they're laundering cartel money through local development projects." Damon nodded grimly. "Good. The bigger they are, the harder they fall." During the flight back to U.S. airspace, he reviewed everything: body cam footage, financial transactions, backroom deals, all neatly cataloged and more than enough to bury them all. "Sir," Foster's voice came through the secure channel. "One more thing. The FBI picked up increased chatter around Millbrook. Looks like someone up high tipped them off. If Blake and the others realize it, they might try to destroy the evidence." Damon leaned back in his seat, eyes hard. "Let them try. They have no idea what's coming." Blake, meanwhile, was feeling a creeping sense of unease. Officer Ryan Parker, the rookie who had done a routine background check on Harold Carter, had stumbled across something shocking. He found himself hesitating outside Blake's office, then finally knocked. "What is it, Parker?" Blake said irritably. "Sir," Ryan said carefully, "Harold Carter's son, he's not just some veteran. He's Colonel Damon Carter." "So?" Blake snapped. "Another army brat." "No, sir," Ryan insisted. "He's Delta Force. I command. They call him the Ghost." Blake laughed harshly. "You've been watching too many action movies, kid." But Ryan didn't laugh. "Sir, I served a year in logistics at Fort Bragg before this. I heard stories. The kind that make hardened special forces guys go quiet." Blake's smirk faltered slightly. And sir, Ryan added, swallowing hard, the FBI just filed a formal request for all body cam footage of Carter's arrest. DOJ sent a memo. Internal Affairs called twice this morning. The blood drained from Blake's face. Suddenly his morning coffee tasted like acid. Get me the chief, he barked. Now. Chief William Anderson slammed his office door shut so hard that the glass rattled. His face was flushed with anger as he rounded on Blake. You absolute idiot, Anderson growled. Do you have any idea what you've done? Blake stood stiffly at attention, but his palms were sweating. I didn't know who Carter's son was. You didn't know? Anderson spat. You think the syndicate's gonna cover this? The mayor's already panicking. If this blows up, we're finished. You're finished? Outside the office, officers pretended not to listen, but tension rippled through the station like a coming storm. Everyone could sense it, the cracks were forming. Chief Anderson pressed his face close to Blake's. Fix this, he hissed. Before Carter's boy turns this into a federal circus. I don't care how. Just make it go away. Blake nodded, swallowing the sour taste of fear. But as he left the office, his phone buzzed with a new message, an unknown number. It simply read, You're not the hunter anymore. You're the prey. Blake's hand trembled slightly. He looked up instinctively, and there, high in the pale morning sky, a military drone circled, almost invisible. Watching. Meanwhile, Harold Carter sat calmly in his cell, legs crossed, back straight. The desk sergeant had grown increasingly nervous over the past hour, shuffling papers and sneaking glances toward Harold as if the old man were radioactive. Finally, the cell door swung open. You're free to go, the sergeant muttered. All charges dropped. Orders from above. Harold raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He retrieved his belongings and stepped into the lobby, and there he was. Damon. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing plain civilian clothes that somehow didn't hide the lethal discipline of his movements. His face was carved in stone, but when he saw his father, his expression softened just enough to show pride. You okay, Dad? Harold nodded once. Nothing I couldn't handle. Good, Damon said quietly. Because now it's my turn. The two Carters turned as one and walked out the front door. Every officer in the station watched them leave, the air thick with an unspoken truth. Something had shifted and there was no stopping it now. As they crossed the parking lot, Damon glanced back, and met Blake's gaze through the station window. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a warning. It was a promise. That evening, back at Carter's Auto Repair, Harold sat behind the counter sipping black coffee while Damon, laptop open, orchestrated a campaign that would make any general proud. Lieutenant Foster, status? Damon said into his earpiece. Internal Affairs raided the evidence room an hour ago, Foster reported. Everything Blake tried to hide? We already backed it up to federal servers. It's out of their hands. And the mayor? Running scared. Tried to call in some favors, but our friends at the DOJ intercepted. A federal task force is being prepped as we speak. Damon nodded grimly. Good. Keep tightening the noose. Harold watched his son work with a mixture of awe and sorrow. This wasn't the boy who used to race toy trucks through the garage. This was a weapon honed by years in the shadows, now turned loose to defend what mattered most. You don't have to do this, son, Harold said softly. Damon looked up, eyes fierce. You taught me never to back down from bullies, Dad. Never to let fear dictate right and wrong. Harold smiled faintly. I suppose I did. Outside, Millbrook slept uneasily, sensing something big was coming. Corrupt officials made frantic calls, shredding documents, wiping drives, but it was too late. The avalanche had already begun and nothing could stop it now. Because the ghost was home. And justice was coming. By dawn, the cracks in Millbrook's corrupt empire had widened into gaping chasms. Across town, police officers called in sick en masse. Some simply vanished, leaving behind empty lockers and burning documents. Others scrambled to cover their tracks, shredding what little evidence they could reach before it was too late. But everywhere they turned, the ghost had already been there first. Harold watched from the shop's office window as unmarked black SUVs with government plates rolled quietly through the streets. Federal agents moved with purpose like surgeons closing around a tumor. Damon set down his coffee and tapped rapidly on his laptop. They're sweeping City Hall now. Internal memos. Kickback contracts. Even the mayor's offshore accounts. It's all coming down. About time, Harold muttered, watching a squad of agents surround the police station. Damon's earpiece buzzed. Sir, Lieutenant Foster's voice came through. We intercepted new chatter. Looks like Chief Anderson and Mayor Gregory are planning to make a run for it. Private airstrip just outside county limits. Damon's eyes narrowed. Block every route. No one leaves Millbrook tonight. He stood, zipping his bag closed. You stay here, Dad? Harold raised an eyebrow. Son, I survived Tet. You think I'm scared now? A grim smile tugged at Damon's mouth. Not for your sake. For theirs. He left without another word, moving with a predator's certainty into the gathering dusk. At the private airstrip on the town's outskirts, Mayor Thomas Gregory paced nervously beside a waiting jet. This was supposed to be clean, he barked into his burner phone. Carter was just some old man. You're dealing with the ghost, you fool, hissed the voice on the other end. Every minute you delay, you dig your own grave deeper. Get on that plane and disappear. Gregory snapped the phone shut and turned to Chief Anderson. Where's Blake? Trying to erase what's left, Anderson muttered. He's on his way. Engines roared in the distance, an SUV barreling toward them. Blake screeched to a stop, leapt out, clutching a battered briefcase. Everything we have left, he gasped. It's not much. Most files are gone. The mayor nodded grimly. Good enough. Let's go. They turned toward the jet and froze. Damon Carter stood at the bottom of the staircase, arms folded. Alone. Unarmed. But the three men didn't move. Something about the way he stood, utterly fearless, completely in control, rooted them to the spot. You're not going anywhere, Damon said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Chief Anderson's hand twitched toward his gun. Don't, Damon advised quietly. You'll never make it. For a long moment no one moved. Then sirens howled in the distance. Red and blue lights flared across the night sky as a convoy of federal vehicles descended on the airstrip. Gregory cursed and raised his hands. Anderson dropped his weapon with a clatter. Only Blake hesitated, sweat pouring down his face. He met Damon's eyes, and saw no hatred there, no rage. Only cold, implacable judgment. Slowly, Blake set the briefcase down and raised his hands. As the feds moved in, Damon turned away, already speaking into his earpiece. Foster the airstrip secure. Begin phase 2. Broadcast everything. Already live, sir, Foster replied. Across the country, news stations interrupted programming with breaking coverage. Footage played of police officers shaking down shop owners. Secret recordings revealed backroom deals between city officials and cartel operatives. Bank transfers, bribes, intimidation. Evidence layered upon evidence. Millbrook's dirty secrets were laid bare for the world to see. And no one could stop it now. By sunrise, Millbrook had become a battlefield, but not the kind Harold Carter had fought on decades ago. This was a war of information. Screens in every diner, bar, gas station, and living room lit up with footage exposing the corruption that had poisoned their town for years. Citizens watched in stunned silence as the lies unraveled. The mayor, the police chief, even respected judges, they were all implicated. The syndicate's grip had snapped like a rotten rope. At Carter's auto repair, Harold poured himself a coffee, listening to the quiet. No distant gunfire. No tires screeching. Just the slow, painful awakening of a town that had been asleep too long. You did it, son, Harold said softly, half to himself. Damon sat nearby, laptop open, monitoring dozens of live feeds. His eyes were steady, but there was no triumph there. Only focus. It's not over yet, Damon said. White's still out there. Alexander White. The real architect behind the syndicate's control in Millbrook, and dozens of other towns like it. They hadn't captured him. Not yet. Damon's secure phone buzzed. Lieutenant Foster's voice crackled through. Sir, White's moving. Private convoy spotted heading south. Looks like he's pulling his assets out. Damon's jaw tightened. And Millbrook? Unrecoverable for him, Foster said. His local networks are collapsing. Too many people flipping to save themselves. Even his contractors are bailing. Damon allowed himself a breath. Good. Let him run. The feds will catch him eventually. But deep down he knew White wouldn't go quietly. Men like him didn't surrender. They planned. They plotted. They waited for new opportunities to strike. And somewhere out there White was already scheming. Back at Millbrook Police Department, Officer Ryan Parker, now acting chief, coordinated with federal agents. Files were being boxed up. Desks cleared. New officers, vetted and trained, were preparing to rebuild from the ashes. Ryan looked around the main squad room, the same room where weeks ago the corrupt officers had laughed at Harold Carter as they dragged him into a cell. Not anymore. The corruption had been torn out by the roots. And in its place, something rare and precious was growing: trust. As Ryan finalized paperwork, his phone vibrated with a coded text from Damon. New threats incoming. Stay sharp. Trust only verified channels. Ryan slipped the phone into his pocket, feeling a weight settle on his shoulders, but also a fierce pride. He wouldn't let Millbrook fall again. Not on his watch. Across town, Rachel Turner, the reporter who had risked her career chasing the truth about Millbrook, sat in the local cafe, finishing the final paragraphs of her article. The headline blazed across her laptop screen. Ghost Justice: How One Veteran's Son Took Down a Town's Corruption. It was already going viral, picked up by national outlets, setting fire to social media. Other towns were reaching out, asking questions, demanding investigations, calling for reform. Millbrook's fight wasn't staying in Millbrook. It was spreading. And Harold Carter's quiet act of defiance, standing up to 3 crooked cops in a greasy garage, had started it all. The town of Millbrook woke under a new sun, a sun that didn't rise over a town ruled by fear anymore. For the first time in decades, ordinary people walked Main Street without the tight, invisible pressure of corruption pressing down on them. Kids rode bikes again. Shops opened their doors without silent fear of who might walk in wearing a badge. Harold Carter wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside the shop. The old wooden sign, Carter's Auto Repair EST 1972, hung proud and steady. Across the street he spotted Ryan Parker, now Chief Parker, talking with a group of federal agents, pointing to a map of the town. Plans for community rebuilding, transparency projects, and citizen review boards were already underway. Harold smiled to himself. "You did good, kid," he muttered. "Not just Ryan. The town itself." His phone buzzed. A simple text from Damon. "On my way out. Meeting you at the shop." Harold poured 2 coffees, waiting. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Damon pulled up in a dusty black SUV, wearing jeans and a simple jacket. No uniform, no visible rank, but to Harold he might as well have been wearing the stars of a general. They shook hands firmly, a silent exchange of respect that didn't need words. "You heading out already?" Harold asked after a beat. Damon nodded. "Arizona. Similar situation. A town drowning in corruption. They need a little encouragement to stand up." Harold chuckled. "Sounds familiar." Damon's face softened. "I learned from the best." Harold sipped his coffee. "They ready for what's coming?" "No," Damon admitted. "But they will be. Once they realize they don't have to take it anymore." They stood together in silence for a long moment, watching the town wake up. "You sure you're okay staying here?" Damon asked. Harold smiled faintly. "This is my home. Always has been. Always will be. And besides..." He tapped his temple. "An old soldier can still fight. Just fight smarter now." Damon grinned. "Yeah, I noticed." As Damon climbed into his SUV, Harold called after him. "Hey, son." Damon paused, one hand on the door. "Remember," Harold said. "The worst bullies, the real ones, they don't look like monsters. They wear suits. They sit behind desks. They smile while they ruin lives." "I know," Damon said quietly. "That's why they'll never see me coming." He nodded once, a final goodbye for now, and drove off toward his next battleground. Harold stood there a while longer, coffee cooling in his hand. He watched the townspeople moving, rebuilding, living. He saw the hope rekindled where fear had once lived. Millbrook would never be perfect. No town ever was. But it was awake now. It was alive. And it would never be silent again. Because once people remember they can fight back, corruption doesn't stand a chance. Not against men like Harold Carter. And certainly not against sons like Damon Carter, the ghost. Far away, in a dusty desert town where corruption hid behind polished doors, a new story was about to unfold. Another ghost was already moving through the shadows, preparing to teach bullies that sometimes justice doesn't knock. Sometimes it kicks the door down. At True Echo, we believe real change starts with ordinary people standing tall against extraordinary odds. Harold Carter didn't have a fortune, a title, or political power, just a backbone forged in battle and a heart that refused to surrender. His story reminds us, the true strength of a free people lies not in the power they hold, but in their willingness to stand up for what is right. If this story moved you, subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories of courage, justice, and standing against corruption. Comment below with your thoughts. What would you do if it were your town? And share this video to spread the message. We don't have to be silent. Together we can be the echo that shakes the world.